First team for the finals is Sharun and Nayantara from IIT Bombay. Give our hands about it. Second is Sai and Saatvik. Third, we have Aniket and Sharun. And fourth, we have Aryan and Samara. Requesting a big round of applause for everyone. Now calling upon the chair to start the debate.
Yeah. Before I start, two shout-outs. One to Shaurya, fantastic teammate, learned a lot. Thank you for carrying me. Second to Ignore Depsop. Going forward, starting speech in 3, 2, 1. Note, even if Ops says that CJ is the best possible person to ever exist on the planet, there are certain things that they just cannot go forward and say that does not happen. One, CJ is likely going to still have a huge set of beliefs which they rarely care about because they've gone through and seen multiple cases where they're adjudicating or seeing multiple different kinds of things wherein they have seen, oh, how is caste discrimination being treated, etc., etc. Which means they do end up dealing into political things, not dealing specifically, but seeing or delving into these political things and make up beliefs that they extremely care about. 2. Note, in most instances, the backlogs in courts are extremely higher. So even if this open court system is the only way to do it, or this is the only way it happens, the way in which decision making happens is based on what kind of backlogs are already present, how can we sort them, etc., etc. It makes it incredibly hazy for the CJ to be able to come up with a decision due to 3 fundamental reasons. 1. Political parties often will try to go forward and lobby or something that goes forward in their favor to ensure that at most instances we are the only ones whose case is actually being approved to be reviewed quickly. 2. Media owned by big corporations of course want to go forward and publicize or sensationalize things in a manner that CJ takes more note of it as opposed to something else that is already happening, which means that is the most relevant thing that the judge has to go for and do. Which means even if they think in the best possible fashion, they're definitely going to be biased in some form or another. 3. They also have connections or peer groups within their loyal groups, which means they care more about what a specific person is saying as opposed to someone else, which means maybe poor people are important and they want to listen to them, but if their best friend goes forward and says that, oh, this is the way that it happens, and their legal mentor, for example, Suri Sorajit would have been for the current CJ, etc., these are the kind of things that honestly matter. Note, it also likely means that in most cases, the only cases they end up picking are the ones that they think can actually go forward and win, which means they can also see which kind of panel is going to sit, which judge is retiring when, what judge is actually going to go forward and take over these cases. Because multiple times they only approve the ones wherein they know, okay, a judge is going away and it's likely that it's easier to win and satisfy the personal opinion that I have in most cases. Note, by virtue of this, we satisfy two arguments. A, picking is just tough, but 2, you oftentimes end up picking the things that you believe in more as opposed to anything else. Note, in most instances, when this kind of thing happens, if something new comes up and they just approve it with these biases in mind, it likely means each and every backlog that courts have right now get further pushed back. By virtue of which, in most instances, they just run the clock out completely whenever some kind of cases happen. Let's say there's an important case on, let's say, the government going forward and acquiring land or something of that nature. In most instances, these are the ones that are deprioritized, and whenever it happens, there are 3 fundamental harms that occur. 1, it just harms the poor a lot more because they have already spent in a lot of legal fees in this and they are just not getting an appearance. In India, unfortunately, there are so many cases that take place all the time. You need 10 years just to get hearings, and even after hearings, you need to get more hearings. Tariq pe tariq, whatever. 2, support in most instances goes away because it's not as relevant anymore. The news media does not care about these things. 10 years have already happened. There's some new kind of buzzwords that they care about way more and new things that they want to sensationalize. Due to which, in most instances, Sabrimala might be the one that gets picked as opposed to any other woman who's actually still being violated in other parts of the world, in other parts of India. 3, in most instances, the poor end up thinking, or the people who unfortunately cannot opt into it end up thinking that there's just no other alternative and just give up. Which means in most instances, people end up reaching a situation where they just do not care as much about the system or feel that the system is not efficient enough to go forward and give us justice. Which means they do not have a way to ensure that more cases happen or these cases are actually happening better. If people don't support it, it's unlikely the legal system is anything worthwhile to happen. Note then, how are we specifically able to solve this? CO.
How does the AI actually make a decision which case should be taken?
Perfect. Going forward, then our case is simple. How does the AI go for and solve this? Note, it's likely to be fair due to 2 fundamental reasons with further sub-reasons. 1, there will be rigorous data collection, obviously, because you want to go for and make it in the best possible fashion, which means your best kind of data, because even the standards in terms of how you acquire evidence, or how you present evidence, or what you do out of them in courts are extremely high, which means you want to go for and have similar systems when you want to go forward and acquire that through an AI model. 2, they can be trained by the collegium of judges. It does not say that the judge does not have to be involved at all, which means instead of just having the CJ, which is the only unipolar power that is present on their side of the paradigm, you can go for and have the senior most judges with differing views who go forward, discuss all of these things, and come up with some kind of way that this is the right way to pick or this law. Note, in most instances, they're likely to go for agree on because they also realize that there's multiple harms that occur if you are not doing it quicker, but the amount of scrutiny is just way too high. By virtue of which this also leads to compounding effect because now they can constantly review also that is it working well, is it not working well, etc., etc. 2, the things that they're likely to agree on are very simple. they will see the cases where the most amount of people are being affected or the most severe harms are occurring, due to which these cases now take precedence as also anything else that is already happening. Note, you can also go for and see differing liberal democratic states that already exist and figure out what is working for them, what is not. Why is that the best, one of the best possible ways to go for and do it? Because they're highly democratic and care about their people. They want to go for and give the best possible results to what is happening as opposed to what is happening in India right now. Fourth, they can also just see the relevant parts of the law which matter more. What are the kind of precedents that can be set out of this? Which means if I go for and change gay rights right now, what is the kind of impact that it leads on to the people, etc. These are the kinds of things that will definitely go into the AI modeling. But note, you can also have other independent individuals such as legal scholars or people who have worked in this field who do not have any real political, who might have political biases, but since it's a differing views, it's fine. They don't have any particular political associations or affiliations to go for and do all of these things. As long as it works fair, we just prove that it's fine to go for and have this. The simplest claim then that we want to make is on 3 levels. 1, on efficiency. 2, how it actually helps out people and more justice served. But 3, how more poorer people are unfortunately lawyers who can never actually go to the open court and say, hello CJ, I actually want this case to be done right now, are the ones who can also go forward and be a part of the system here.
In the United States, the majority of the demographic is white, but in jails, the majority of the people are black. Doesn't that smell like biased?
Yeah, which is why we'll see both of them going forward then in terms of what we are solving. 1, it is likely to be more efficient. Note, if the CJ is only responsible, has a team of people who are doing it, it means it's just incredibly tough to figure out how does this actually fill into the backlog, what are we going to do out of this. In this manner, when the AI systems are present, they can just work faster because they're designed to be that way and they have the capacity to do it, which means efficiency just increases multi-fold. The implication is extremely simple. 1, cases actually happen faster, at least you get more opportunities to go forward and appear in front of the judge, by which you're fine. Because on the comparative, you just feel, oh, my case will be just stuck in the High Court and I won't be able to do anything. The government can just take over my land whenever they want and I can get no recourse out of this mechanism. When these kinds of things happen, people lose out justice. Trust on the justice system, but on this side, it's likely that they care more about it because they realize that at least they're giving me a chance to go for and have this case. 2, the transparency is obviously higher because you can always have self-correcting measure, which to say the CJI who does not care enough because being the CJI is the last thing that they eventually might do after that they retire at 60 and their life is sorted. They don't have to worry about other things in their life any which way. But the AI model likely has to go for pick out in the perfect manner. People can go for actively scrutinize all of these things. When this specifically happens, it's even better because the transparency of system furthers our impact at large. 3, legal systems getting better is also good because lawyers who unfortunately cannot go to the CJ and people or who cannot unfortunately hire a couple symbol to always go to Chandrachud and say I want this case right now, can also go forward and apply through this AI mechanism, which is to say you can have more ways in which you can actually approach justice or have more ways in which you can ensure that your case is also heard in Supreme Court or the ways in which it should be heard. As long as all of that is true, there are 3 fundamental things that we should win on. 1, it's just faster, better and lacks biases, and even if it has biases, it is corrected over time. 2, more people opt in and care about the justice system, due to which legal justice systems are also forced to be better, that there are so many people that we have to be accountable towards. But 3, and most importantly, more lawyers can actually go for and benefit out of this. With that, extremely proud to propose.
Cool. Assuming that I'm perfectly audible, which I am. Also, shout out to Sai, shout out to DTU, I love all of you. Having that said, starting with my speech in 3, 2, 1, start. Humans are uniquely capable to sense the urgent attitude of certain cases and their potential threat. I don't think that AI can do that, right? And when you look at Patra and everything that opening government has to talk about in terms of how AI is going to be perfect and AI doesn't have all of these biases because it's self-correcting, I'm going to prove structurally that none of these things are true because all of their proof is something that they can't really go ahead and give me structural reasons for. I'll tell you the decision-making matrix that the AI follows and why it's not going to be how opening government talks about, right? Because notice, they only talk about how you will only go ahead and push cases that go ahead and win through. I think let's talk about AI firstly, right? Why does AI not make the best decisions? I think they try to just wash over the idea of dataset biases, but 2 things, right? If data is made from state records, the idea is that the data collection process is not done by AI. It's still done by people on the ground, and it's still done by people who go ahead and perpetuate these biases, which means that your data is still going to be dirty in some senses. And like Sai asked in the POI, it also means that you are going to structurally see things like black people or African American people being more in jails, while white people not, which means that AI is less likely to doubt itself in the data it's being fed on, because if AI doubts that, then the question is that what the fuck does AI trust? And I don't think in a case like that, we think that AI then inherently goes ahead and doubts things of its own. But secondly, right, AI is a computer program, and that means that its working is purely mathematical. This is very important because that means that AI is going to be a massively utilitarian in the way that it operates. Why do I say this, right? Because notice, you cannot comprehend other moral frameworks works because they're complex to break down in just a mere number of zeros and ones, which means that the only thing that the AI, which is a computer model, can understand is something that you can break down in zeros and ones, which is the idea of utility. Where is utility maximized? Where is pain maximized? Where is suffering maximized? But the problem here is that the reference point that the AI has to measure pain and suffering is that of a very privileged person or that of a very privileged community, because it comes from these sort of data sets in the first place, right? Which means that let's just think about a few cases, right? If you look at the Equal Marriage Act or same-sex adoption, if you think about it, these probably won't be important enough cases for the AI, because the harm that's being caused to people of this vulnerable community, let's talk about the LGBTQ community, isn't big enough when you compare it to people who are getting murdered, right? Because then the mental turmoil that you have is probably much less on a utilitarian metric. I am unsure about what is the capability of this AI to look into the future and have foresight enough to see that, oh, just because I go ahead and prioritize this case means that it's going to send ripples in the judicial world. You're actually going to have these cases turn up. You're actually going to have protests and activism on the basis of this. I am unsure how AI is able to do that, but fundamentally, I think people are able to do this, right? Patra says that you are only going to push cases forward that are going to win. I say, no, you are going to push cases forward because AI is the utilitarian maximizing machine. It wants all cases to win. Real people have and see the value even in things failing, which means even if a case is brought to the court and it ends up losing, that doesn't mean that it had no value. That still means that it brought up important discourse. This discourse might break down into two things, right? Firstly, like let's look at the same-sex marriage, right? Even though it wasn't passed as a law, we still had government guidelines as to how we can make a more conducive environment for LGBTQI people in the current system. But secondly, just the fact that multiple people dissent on these factors means that you can actually have recorded evidence of multiple people going ahead and talking about things like this, and then you can use these as case laws, or maybe you can use this as a future precedent to have better legal documentation and have actual documentation of what people thought at that point in time. Notice, these are incentives that are probably not going to be there for the AI, because the AI just wants the case to win. The AI just wants to affect the maximum number of people. I think people in such a high legal position have other considerations apart from that. But before that, closing.
70,000 cases, one man to decide. How exactly are you going to prioritize this? You have other things to do.
The simple fact is that it's not just the one person is signing the last deal, right? The idea is that you still have a decision-making matrix, and not a lot of cases are brought up that way. These are still going to be high-profile cases in that sense. But notice, right? The AI also understands things. The AI also doesn't understand things that a normal judge would have, right? This probably looks like public triggers, right? Which means that if somebody of a minority was probably violently assaulted in some place, people understand that news. They can understand what happened and the historical context behind those things. I am unsure as to how much data this AI has and how much active decision making it can do on the basis of this data, because ideally, either you're training this data only on the best data sets that Patra talks about, which are going to be extremely limited, or you're training this AI on all data sets, which means that the amount of data and the conclusion that you can draw from it can also be straight up garbage, because there is a lot of wrong data out there. But then, why is the comparative achieve justice, and why is that better, right? Humans are just generally better at doing these kinds of things for a few reasons. Let's talk about reputational incentives. These are very senior people. This means that these people not only have legacy incentives in the first place, but they also have post-retirement agendas. They're legal scholars. Even if they don't do a job, they're still legal scholars. They still have a position in society, and these people have reached this place by accumulating this sort of reputation, which means they're not willing to just throw it away at all points in time. But then, on the idea of empathy, I am just not sure how do you inculcate ideas that are non-utilitarian in this. Patra.
Yeah, you're saying that data can be elitist. The CJ is the most elite person in the legal structure of India. What are you saying?
Bro, data is objectively elite. The idea that the CGI can question themselves is the most important part. The idea that they're human. I'll just talk about philosophy, right? There are multiple moral frameworks that exist in the world. Probably things like, what's it called? Just a second. Probably things like virtue ethics, right? Which is economically left but socially right-leaning, say, moral framework. The important part about this is that because you can't break this down into zeros and ones, that means that you can't feed this into the AI, because we ourselves don't know how to break it down into a model that AI can understand. This means that the human and the social development that a person goes through, this is a person that has a lot of courage, this is a person that has a brilliant career, they do courses on this political philosophy, they do courses on human philosophy, which means that they understand when and where their opinion counts for, which literally goes on to say that these people can go ahead and make the right decisions, and they can make decisions outside the ambit of the AI, which means that even if a few cases are deprioritized, we are more than willing for that to happen, because it is only the CGI that can go ahead and make these sorts of breakthroughs. I think AIs are trained on past models, and just before I get to the numbers, let's also talk about one more important thing. It's the idea of accountability. The fact that AI does something wrong, you can do nothing about, right? Patra says that, oh, you can go ahead and check these. But no, you can't go ahead and check these, because the thing is done at a point in time, right? If it is solely in the hands of the AI, that means that you can't go ahead and correct these sort of things. You can't change these things post facto, and the changes and the harm has already been done. I think you can go ahead and ask the CGI, and in that sense, you can actually try to influence the way they make these decisions. And I don't think you can do that with an AI, because it's a literal black box. A simple example of this might be just data privacy, right? Privacy to the people is probably not as important. So you might be okay to violate the privacy of 1,000 individuals if it saves one person. I don't think that's how people in law work. I don't think that's how moral people work. But I do think that's how a utilitarian person works. And I think that's why AI does not make the best decisions for you. So proud to oppose.
Sic semper tyrannis, death to tyrants. We don't want one person controlling the fate of a country that made a tryst with destiny because they did not want colonial masters anymore. We want a democratic system that is transparent. We don't want one person running the way that we live our lives. First, let's explain to you what this is likely to look like. If you prefer a model, that doesn't mean it has to be the way OG or OO says, it's based on what is realistically likely. So, what would judges agree to? Probably they wouldn't agree to a CGI deciding how the model works, and there would be no impact. They would probably want to maintain independence, so politicians can't decide how the model works. So, the most likely outcome of this is senior judges in the collegium deciding how the system works, constantly reviewing it, coming from different positions in life and different political views. And second, obviously, data experts, people who know how AI works, who can translate these biases to these judges. This is how almost every system in our democracy often works, with experts from different pieces and parts of society, like, say, election commissions, which talk about things from different perspectives. So, let's then talk about first why the CGI is systematically biased in a way that harms poor people. First, capacity. What we told you is that companies can create concern through using the media to push issues that don't matter that much to make it look like it matters more. Second, you literally cannot read everything. If there are 70,000 cases, you don't have the time to go through everything the country is caring about. Second, incentives. We told you about the beliefs in life. What did OO tell you? They care about what their peers say. They didn't listen to Aniket. Their peers are the people who they respect, not every single peer they have. If they believe strongly in a certain viewpoint and the other people who disagree with them have not changed their mind for their entire life, presumably they still believe the people who they do actually agree with, and so they respect their view and not the people outside of that. Third, we have not heard a single explanation from opposition on accountability on their side. What do you do when the CGI gets it wrong? What do you do when the CGI is systematically biased? What do you do when the person who you elect to the collegium, which is often based on seniority, is someone who simply does not care about a certain group of the population? We don't know if this is true. He could be right-wing, left-wing. We don't care. It's a democracy. We want to push the people who matter. Second, let's talk about accountability and flip everything Saatvik says about AI. So, what exactly happens in terms of data collection? No, thank you. Data collection is by people on the ground who have biases. That's true, Saatvik. That doesn't change on either side of this debate. The way we check that is through rigorous standards of evidence collection in the courts, through things like standing, through things like proving the evidence you've collected is from the right source, checking it, constantly criticizing it. That is not going to change. However, what he said then is that the CGI can make good decisions because we don't have evidence of things that we don't know. Well, the things that we don't know don't have evidence for our beliefs either. So when the CGI decides there's not enough evidence for this case, but I think it matters, that is the definition of a bias. We think that that is the whole problem here. If you don't have good data, and that's the problem from their side, then on our side, we encourage better collection of data while they encourage biased decisions which are explicitly unaccountable. Second, they say you're overly utilitarian. How do you control things like pain and utility? First of all, we don't think it's utilitarian. We define what it looks like. The precedent of what the court has said in the Constitution and all the past justices and who made decisions in the past. What does this look like? Justices who have different opinions, who are right-wing and left-wing, who are a coalition of different things the country believes. Collegium judges right now who care about different preferences, who train it to make sure they look at things on the left and the right, and obviously people who do care about virtue ethics because it's trained on judges who care about the law. So obviously it's not just utilitarianism, but we're fine to defend utilitarianism as well because the only system they've given elsewise is virtue ethics or possibly deontology, which they talk about, but these are all obligations that we decide to trade off. That's what the law is about. We make decisions on what your right matters more than another right. So it's obviously subjective. How do you decide between someone's right to get food and someone's right to not have something stolen from them? Often we look at utility. If they're poor, we care a lot more about them. So the way we make decisions about morality is utility, and the fact that the judge doesn't do this is a harm to opening government. Third of all, they say you think of how to make the case win if you're the AI. Important question, panel. What does the AI want? Which case does it want to win? I don't understand. The CGI has opinions, and they'll pick cases where they think you can win. They'll wait for people on the panel to get retired, so they have a support for the majority they can use to make the case win. All the incentives we gave you, political lobbying, the fact they want a seat in the Rajya Sabha later, or people who make them feel they're better people because they push a political viewpoint. That's how you pick a case that wins. AI doesn't pick a case that wins because it doesn't have a case that they want to win in the first place. There is no horse in the race. All of this makes it significantly more accountable. Finally, in terms of capacity, you can definitely see AI. The black box is Chandrachud, not the AI. First, the data is visible because you can see the patterns that come out of the decisions that this AI make, as well as the way that this training set works in a way that you cannot with Chandrachud, because you cannot go into his room, ask him how he's thinking about every single decision. This is about millions of people being affected by 70,000 cases that he's looking through. Obviously, you get more data on what the AI system is doing. Second, you can definitely see patterns. The reason it's not a black box is because we have ways to check how AI systems work. Let's see what deep learning is. Often you have nodes and parameters which the AI decides are important. So if it sees feminine words as less important, what you can do is something called cluster algorithms, which is using things like machine learning to catch biases in the AI. So catch patterns through AI, also through machines that you understand how they work and figure out if they're biased. But you can't do that with Chandrachud. You don't know how he's thinking. You don't know what he would say for every decision. Third, you can't try it out in a different context to prove that it's biased. You can't take Chandrachud, put him into a room, make him read 50 cases and then say, why is your decision wrong? But you can with the AI because the algorithm is publicly available. Finally, transparency. You know what the AI wants now, because now every legal researcher wants to understand how to push their cases forward so they'll know exactly what the metrics are. All of this impacts on accountability and wins us a debate on that. But second, let's talk about efficiency and say why that impact is winning even if we don't win accountability. CEO, before that.
Just like with AI, if you give a particular set of cases to different judges, they will probably all make different decisions. But isn't any of the decisions that has to be correct the way you are?
Yes, that's how precedent works. Judges make different decisions, and then you look at what the main decisions become at the highest level of courts. You then figure out what the general trend is towards, and that's how you figure out what the law is saying. That's what the AI does. The CGI has their own opinion. That's why they're at the top of the court system. We don't think that means that they're always correct. Finally, efficiency and fairness. First, you cannot be alarmist on op. In the absolute worst case, the cases are still important because the AI still talks about things that matter, but they may be a little bit different to what the CGI would have picked. We don't think they can prove we'll pick some random case about 3 people in a random town. It'll still be a huge issue, and the decision is still made by the court. So the accountability is not that important. What matters more is efficiency. We took CO. First, every single paralegal who is working on looking through 70,000 cases to collate reports to send it to the CGI, every single person in the High Court who has the capability to clerk there is now working on making sure that the listing goes up. Every lawyer who's spending lots and lots of money to try to get a hearing in the open court, hoping that Chandrachud takes care of their case in the first place. The time Chandrachud spends. This is time that can be spent helping other businesses make sure they're compliant with regulations, helping poor people make sure that they're not getting harassed by the police, helping people on the ground who don't have access to any lawyers because they're too busy writing reports for Chandrachud. This is immense. This matters more. First, more people get affected. Second, the impact on these vulnerable people matters significantly more. Not only do they systematically disprivilege someone who isn't rich enough to play Chandrachud, they also make it so those poor people have no one to actually support them when the government has no resources left. But third of all, these people strategically matter in this debate because these people are the source of legitimacy for the government at all. The people who are being violated by the laws, who don't have any justice anywhere, are significantly more important because they don't get access to something at all. In the listing, the decisions you make don't matter that much because you got a chance on both sides, even if it was biased. So principally, the government should care about giving you a lawyer as opposed to giving you the best lawyer. Opening government.
Starting in 3, 2, 1 second. Looking through. Lost my notes. Yeah. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. AI is going to have a lot of false negatives because it is so efficient. First, we think that the quality of affidavit that poor people always file is not up to the mark. And if some legal person is frowning at me, it's because I'm not a lawyer. But in my head, the way that the law works is I file an affidavit with all the evidence that has been gathered so far, or what I think the interpretation of the case is. This depends a lot on the quality of the lawyer that I go to, because he drafts or she or they draft the affidavit for me. What happens with poor people? First, we think they often don't have the resources to gather the best material possible to put the best affidavit together. Note the reaction that AI has to this. Your file has been rejected. You need to fill these details again. Where is the digital literacy for people to go ahead and conceptualize why was this rejected in the first time? But even if it's made specific that this is the column that needs to be corrected, there's a fee that is obviously going to be charged because technology doesn't grow on trees. It is chargeable. Electricity is something that we are desperately running out of. The fee is a repetitive, recurring ongoing cost that you have to bear at any given point of time. But secondly, then on the comparative, the CJI is able to ask for the context, right, from the person who is going ahead and doing this. And the context can be as stupid as what happened last Friday, when the judge said that you listed my first, the first matter listed was mine and the last matter should be mine and things like that. We think all kinds of contexts matter because at least it is more discussion than what the AI accords to you on their side of the house. So in vast majority of instances, what happens to poor people is that they get false negative out and their cases never get listed. This beats their idea of efficiency. But secondly, let's be charitable. False negatives don't happen. Poor people's cases are listed. Why is this a good thing? Why is giving the poor a false hope that they can go ahead and deal with legal batteries of such massive corporations against whom they have lawsuits, that they have a chance or an inkling to succeed? Why should you put them through the process of being intimidated by 5 lackeys that some firm in South Delhi has gone and recruited and things like that? Why should we go ahead and put them through transportation costs, through costs of going ahead and taking a day off because they have to appear in court, and those kinds of things is something that's extremely unclear to me. We think that when the open court discussion between the CJ and the lawyer happens, they are able to rationalize why the case was thrown out. But on the comparative, you put them through the entire extent or the agony of the case routine and you still come out disappointed. We would rather think it's better to save on that hope, on that time you would have spent on taking that day off, on that money resource and things like that. Gov bench has not explained when do poor realize catharsis. We say poor realize catharsis at the end of that case, but when the end verdict of that case is not in your favor, they feel that there is no change in the justice system. We think that this is just symmetric in terms of them. But let's just stop with the mitigation. Why do we win? A couple of things. We think the Sabarimala, the Tirupati beef case, all of these cases are much, much more important than what poor people care about. This is true for 2 reasons. One, often these are emotionally charged cases that the vast majority of people resonate with. My faith has conditioned what I am. My name is made up of 3 gods. This is an inalienable characteristic to me. And no matter what corner of the world I run to, this will still chase me to the depths of the world. What I eat is shaped by my religion. What I drink is shaped by my religion. And things like that. And not just this, the way that my parents conditioned me and things like that. We think these emotionally charged circumstances is something that the CJI can only understand. That's why the Tirupati beef case might be very laughable for a vast majority of instances. But ask the people who donate on an annual basis 40 billion rupees to the Tirupati Hundi. Ask the people who go ahead and book 3 years in advance the Tirupati lining like darshan system and things like that. For them, this matters much, much more. Why is this important? Because on scale, there are far more number of people. When you lose the opt-in of a greater majority of people, it's bad because they stop exercising their faith in the justice system. They stop going ahead and doing things like reporting cases because they think it does not work. They believe in things like mob violence, start resharing hate speech and things like that. We think this mass opt-out is far, far worse. This loss of trust is bad, not just on scale, but also it just hurts the system in a way that's very unique. That's the first thing. What is the second thing that I want to win on? The second thing that I want to win on is quite clearly the assignment of cases and the bench allocation. Note the weak analysis on OG, that I will put together people from the left wing and the right wing for a politically charged case. How the fuck does that happen? Who in their right minds can, how does a machine know that this case is 90 degrees center of right or 70 degrees center of left? Who knows that Rishikesh Roy in his last judgment gave something that was quite left-leaning or left-indicating, and that's why we should switch the panels and things like that. We think the most likely way in which AI is going to prioritize cases is it's going to fill up cases in the courts that are quite empty. It's going to fill up cases in judges who have a track record of giving judgments faster and what not. We think this unique distinction of recognizing what judge needs what kind of unique panel is something that uniquely is only retained when the human CJI is going ahead and assigning these cases. Why is this important? Because the composition of the judge panel is often what determines the end integrity of the judgment that is brought on our side of the house. Why is this the case? Because there is more discourse that is driven often in these instances when people of differing viewpoints come together and whatnot. But just proving very overwhelmingly why does this not happen on their side of the house? Because one, people's biases can also change over time. How do you update the most recent reflection of bias that they have? Before the picture of Modi and Chandrachud playing together in a house came up, the left media was all going gaga over Chandrachud. But the recent shift in optics and dynamics is something that an AI can never capture.
okay, why can't the collegium of judges see these things? Because emotions aren't what drive religion. The constitution is. The judges aren't decided by the AI. The CJI still does that. All of these are solvable by people who know how this works.
Oh, if the collegium is doing this, the human time taken to review each case is still the same. Do you even want to win the debate if you're running that? That doesn't make any sense. Cool. Why is this the most important thing? This recent shift in dynamics is something that then becomes quite important. But there are other ascriptive characteristics that the AI just cannot recognize, such as who has the mental bandwidth to keep going a case which is probably going to go on for long. I can go on and on in terms of the ascriptive characteristics that it cannot decide. Why does this overwhelmingly grant us the debate? Because note, this is the more important clash. Let's be honest. On net, the AI and the CJI have incentives to let in a lot of cases. This is true for two reasons. One, because this is what keeps people's faith in the system. But second, because that's literally the way that the wheel keeps going. It's very unreasonable to expect all the information at the starting of the case. So this is very little delta on both sides. What is of greater delta is how the case pans out, and that is just based on the kind of panel composition that you receive. What is of greater delta is the accountability that you impose to this individual. What is of greater delta is the emotionally charged cases which will be heard, and not the cases of the poor who are anyways on a stairway to heaven where nobody is going to hear to what they have to say.
With a self count of 3, 2, 1. Note that the incentive to retain people's faith in the system did not and was not enough to go and reduce the number of cases that currently exists that overburdens the Supreme Court in the first place. Which means it's a very weak incentive for you to want to go and crowd in cases and deal with them with a certain degree of urgency. Second, opposition claim in general is that this AI is less empathetic in nature. Even if that's the case, we think that's better in terms of evaluating which cases need more priority, in terms of deciding to allocate resource to them and time to them, which is extremely limited in terms of the lawyers that you have and in terms of the prioritization that you need to do, and as well as the factors that you need to go and consider in terms of which is more dire. Say this one murder case that has happened, or rather this other thing that this other instance that you can't necessarily humanly evaluate in terms of which is more important or which is more dire in terms of the solution and solvency that is there, in terms of which probably causes more of a harm when justice is delayed and stuff like that. We think that those are more objective metrics that AI is likely to go and support you for to the largest extent. We don't think that OO's claim of false negatives happen to the furthest degree that they say, but also there's an oversimplification of AI in general and what it's going to look like in terms of and also an additional burden of who does this allocation. Let me make very clear that this AI is not necessarily the thing that goes ahead and allocates judges to the cases that are going to be prioritized to begin with. We don't think that this AI is going to be left on its own without literally accompanying mechanisms that already exist in terms of the CGI still being there and other things that literally still exist within the functioning of the Supreme Court to begin with, which is going to be there. The data can also look like the effects of things that are more objective or things that are more evaluative in nature, such as the effects of delayed justice that has happened in this particular instance, right? Or the effects of justice not being accrued to this particular case in precedent has gone ahead and done this and looked like this, which goes ahead and balances out other things. Even if opposition wants to say that precedent can be biased, etc. Even if you want to go ahead and account for more objective metrics of human experience, you can do that without being swayed by things like your own perspective in the moment of evaluation. And I'll tell you why that moment of evaluation is also not something that's entirely justified in terms of deciding the urgency and not the outcome of the case to begin with. I don't think OO's claim stands in terms of the outcome being determined by this urgency in terms of the kind of judges and the judges in itself being allocated. We think that still exists in terms of other mechanisms, right? Ops world entirely is hinged on two things then. First is obviously CGI discretion, and OG spends enough time on this. So what I'm going to talk about is the second thing, which is literally written in the motion in terms of lawyers going ahead and believing that this case needs to be resolved immediately as well. We think lawyers are also very important and more scalable harm in terms of the beliefs and the biases that they exist with, and go ahead and have the power to implement and have the power to exercise within this world to begin with, right? What does this look like? We think that when a case goes ahead and reaches reaches a level of severity that even concerns the Supreme Court to begin with. It's a matter of like what lawyers go ahead and like take up these cases to be presented, or like to go ahead and present these cases or bring up these cases to the CGI to begin with, in terms of like having a certain incentive, in terms of like in terms of believing that this is something that requires attention, etc. Right? We think this is more of like approximate and ground level impact in terms of like these lawyers being the ones who are going ahead and exercising these like biases, even if OO is able to weigh out why the CGI in itself is not scale, like is probably less biased, and on a comparative being simply scale, and also less credibility as compared to the CGI to begin with, right? But also, how is this belief shaped that these lawyers go ahead and exercise? We think firstly, obviously, like societal narratives, but also your own ingrained biases. But most importantly, the fact that you go ahead and present this in an open court as a lawyer that you are, right? Which means that you're likely to probably go ahead and focus on cases that are extremely sensational for you, which are probably most lucrative for you as a lawyer, which are probably going to be extremely beneficial for you to be in public eye for. Because we think that even if you're a Supreme Court lawyer, you do have these individualistic incentives that exist to go ahead and like propagate certain, like to go ahead and like align yourself with certain cases, even if the CGI is not biased to the extent, even if that's mitigated to an extent. We think this is a more likely harm that is still there on a much more ground level on CG specifically, right? And note that this flips OO on like public triggers and stuff like that as well, right? Because the flip is you go ahead and like you choose things that trigger the public or sensationalize the public into going ahead and ascribing certain value to you as a lawyer, which benefits you in your career, which makes you more viable to go and contest for higher positions, all of this stuff in terms of your credibility, right? What's another issue, and Aryan will extend on this as well. We think whistleblowers and literally like minority like issues and ideas that are not really as sensational but are still important enough to be within the ambit of like Supreme Court decision making, like form a large a significant delta within this debate, right? Because we think that these issues are less likely to come up into like observance or into like importance to begin with. We think that's bad because the possibility of urgency is evaluated by two occupations, of which OG probably proves like CGI. We prove that like lawyers also go ahead and like effectuate like material behind the materialization of these harms, right? We also think that the evaluation of this urgency is principally unjustified. And why is this different from the evaluation of the outcome of a case in general? We think this point of urgency and determining that is where the principle actually lies in terms of why it's not principle, because of a few reasons. We think it's different from the case itself because note that this is a request for urgency, which means it's not a prosecutor and a defendant, which means that they're not like two sides going ahead and arguing and presenting something to like a judge to begin with. It's literally a request that one arbitrary part, like one relative, like even if not completely arbitrary, one self-incentivized actor or an actor who has some self-incentive has to propose to another actor who also has self-incentive. Note that this is something that happens, and firstly, the subjectivity of like weighing out which is worse is something that like goes ahead and like causes harm to begin with. But also, in terms of like a comparison, we think you're much less likely and literally incapacitated to go ahead and like weigh out this one case over screening literally multiple cases to evaluate relative priority, which is why we think that this is not something that's literally okay in terms of basic principle of like of an actor such as a lawyer going ahead and deciding how urgent or how dire your matter is, when that should be left to a forum where you have probably like prosecutors and like opposition to begin with, as opposed to more arbitrary. Thank you.
I'm not sure if an AI will make a good or a bad decision, but I'm sure that if you make an AI make the most important judicial decisions, people will lose trust in the system, and that's what CEO will prove to you. We think the premise of implementing an AI system to replace an important job of a CJ means that you have to verbally explain that you think there is a problem. You'll have to explain what kind of biases and what kind of injustices that these CJs have been causing and what harm these are being caused to these people. Even if you don't explain that, that is the implication that people will have, because you're replacing them with a fucking AI, which means you need to show them that there's a lot of harm that is caused by the CJs making these decisions in and of itself. I'm going to outframe opening up here. I think CJs who make the decisions might have some biases, or a bunch of senior judges and legal experts you put together to train the model might propagate similar set of biases or different set of biases. I don't know. But the truth is there is no correct way to make this decision because it's subjective decisions, right? If you give 5 highly revered judges this problem statement, they presumably have different rosters, and that's what OG agrees to, which means there is no correct way of deciding a roster, which means at every point they make a decision, there's going to be someone who feels they're like this decision is biased against them. If a judge gives me a loss, I'm going to be biased against the verdict because I'm probably feeling that, you know what, I've done better, what the, etc., etc. What this means is the extent to which you can prove that a certain way of making decision is better is limited. But what you can prove better, and what we will do, is show why more people have trust in the system and they will come and reach out to the system. The first link to prove this, I'll tell you why people believe or trust in the judiciary right now. I want you to note that the belief in the, I strongly believe that the judges can make fair decisions. Why am I likely to believe this? Because I'm likely to believe that they're trained to be fair. They go through rigorous training and they're picked after a rigorous process to be a judge. That they're able to like go through the law and then like make the most fair decision. They're the bacon of justice and the only thing that's stopping us from anarchy. The second thing is also that I know that these people are empathetic. They understand people's needs. It's something that is fed into them and trained, and then it's constantly repetitively done. Which means that the judges who make bad decisions are reprimanded, and judges who make good decisions and are free from biases are the ones who are like promoted up the ladders, etc., etc. Which means I strongly believe, as a normal layman person who knows nothing about the law, that judges can make fair decisions. Why do I think that if you implement AI, this breaks down the decision? First thing to note here is that people don't really understand the extent of AI or what the possibilities of AI are. So all the like mumbo jumbo you hear in OG is not going to be relevant to someone who's like just, I don't know, lost his farm and wants to go to the High Court because the Coca-Cola company is trying to like take over the farm, etc., etc. Which means that if I don't have any technical expertise to understand what AI does, I have no real reason to believe this AI is going to be fair. But on the counterfactual, I believe that the judge is fair because I've been taught to believe so from a very young age. I've been like this is reinforced again and again, and also that I think that these are like reverend positions of the government and nobody really questions the judiciary, etc., etc. Which means that the second thing that goes into this is most people don't have access to technology, which means that people think AI is alien and then they fear, and it's very easy to create fearmonger. Which means that more people are likely to say that this is going to be biased. People are likely to buy that AI is likely to be biased. But then if somebody says a judge is likely to be biased, people are unlikely to buy that because of all the reasons I talk about. Why is this broken down and what are the implications of this thing being broken down? The first thing is that the moment you're doing this, you're signaling to the whole world that CJs are biased. I want you to note, this might just be a rooster thing, but the moment you signal that CJs are biased, you're putting the question into people's mind that it's not just CJs, the people who are hearing your cases are also biased. Because if the CJs have the bias to pick a particular case or not, the people who hear your cases will also have a bias of, you know what, maybe I'll prioritize women, maybe what, I'll prioritize poor people, etc., etc. Which means that you think that potentially the ones hearing the cases are also biased. The moment you lose this trust is when you do not turn up to court because you don't think this is okay. You don't think it's okay to turn up to court. Shaurya says that, you know what, this AI will be tested for biases and these biases will be made public. The moment you show that these biases are going to be made public, you're telling that this AI system is going to prioritize women who are hurt. This AI system is going to prioritize like poor people who are hurt. Which means that people think that the system in and of itself is prioritized. Maybe the AI bias that comes about is that it prioritizes rich people. Which means that people don't think that this AI system is fair or we can go ahead and make any change. Which means what this ends up meaning is that most people don't realize this, they don't understand the algorithm and the things that Shaurya says, which means they just lose trust in the system. The last thing to note is that they just know that this bias exists and they never like learn more about it. This is really important because it takes a lot of effort for people to come to court. Why is this true? One, because inaction is easier. As long as some harm is committed to me, going to court is already very, very hard for me, which means it's easier to just like, you know what, it happened, it's a bad luck, whatever, let it go. But secondly, even if it's a bad harm, it costs a shit ton of money to hire lawyers. I'm assuming that like it takes a lot of money to like get hire lawyers, etc., etc. Thirdly, I want to note that it takes a lot of time. I need to go and produce evidence in court. I might not win. I might lose a lot of my life. I might have to take like leave from my job, etc., etc. Which means most of the times I don't necessarily want to go to court in the first place. At a point in time when I think that the system is biased and there's systemic reasons and even the government confirming my bias that the system is biased, I will never ever go to court. A poor farmer should come to the justice system, and that's the only way we can ensure that justice is given to a lot of people. At a point in time when the AI is making the decisions, he's thinking that, you know what, this is probably not good for me.
Poor farmers don't go to the Supreme Court. Class action lawsuits with huge firms who now know how to play the system do. Humans seem very biased because you think they did it intentionally. AI is something you fix.
This is perfect, Shaurya, because you should have heard the clarification. This also applies in high courts, and I think when big companies take away farmlands and etc., these are important cases to be heard at a point in time. And I feel like I don't want to fight against the company because you know what? It's just I'm going to be biased. I probably won't end up turning up to court. I think judicial apathy is the most important impact, and it's going to be weighed. I want to note a few more limitations of AI that was not an opening opposition that is crucial. Because I want you to note that the model is likely to be trained by feeding data of case records, etc., etc. But they don't actually talk about what this data is. I think AI makes decisions based on few things that are probably good or bad, etc., etc. Which means you probably can put things in like degree of harm into it, or probably things like like what is the extent of this case on previous records. But you never be able to show things like what is the public sentiment of this case and it should be prioritized. How important is the case to the precedent that is being set? All of these things are something that's subjective and you can't possibly be modeled in. If he finds out how to model it, I think I can take him to a venture capital that will make a lot of money, but it's not possible. Secondly, I want to note that there are novel things that the AI is going to be really bad at. For example, some things like constitutional related things, or like the first time someone ever says that lakes need to be given right, or things like that. This is very ineffective. Like the AI is going to be very ineffective with judging these novel things, which means there's no pattern to make the decision like OG talks about. Largely, what this means is they will end up making bad decisions. I think the end weighing is very simple. Insofar as this decision making is not so clear on either OG or O, or what is going to be so good or accurate, and there's enough incentives for a judge to make reasonably good decisions, and maybe there's enough incentive for AI to make reasonably good decisions. We need to prioritize which system makes people feel comfortable and turn up to court more. That's when you have more people possibly getting justice. If people don't turn up, you don't get justice.
Four simple things. Firstly, on AI. So the missing link on opening government is to explain which specific cases are going to be unique, because opening is correct, opening opposition or is correct to identify that certain specific cases can only be identified by human experience. The way we enter this round, or the specific link that is missing, is to explain how data actually functions. In multiple instances, there are variations among specific instances. Like, why is this case the least opted case? Why exactly are these cases extremely less? But still, the maximum number of PILs that are filed are because of within these specific niches. We think identifying uniqueness within this data is something that is most important stuff, and this is something that only happens on our side of the house. Because what is this debate not about? This debate is not about minorities. A CGI or any rational person can actually justify why you're prioritizing one specific murder case for that matter, because there is a because there is a loss of life. We think that it is very easy for a human to justify harm that can be weighed easily. It is very difficult to identify which specific harm is the most important harm, etc. That means at best on their side of the house, you can assume that CGI is going to identify a very difficult thing, but it is not going to be the most important. That is something that we explain exclusively by proving why this variation is something that is exclusive. The second thing I want to note is that they claim that CGI is going to be a good person. I think there are two specific reasons why it is not likely to happen. The first reason is, you as a CGI want to remain CGI for a longer period of time. That means you prioritize your tenure as CGI as a really good thing. That means on their side of the house, it is very unlikely that you're going to take specific decisions. In a lot of instances, note what Samara proves. Samara says that there are certain cases that are deeply deprioritized by the state because it calls state out in multiple instances. The moment that this frame is true, it is very likely that people do not want these cases, or governments do not want these cases to become powerful. In these instances, CGIs have this incentive to turn biased, or CGIs have this incentive to deprioritize these specific cases which are detrimental to the already existing government. But even if you think that is untrue, but CGIs can always justify prioritizing a less important case and not a more important case, because if anything bad happens in a case, their legacy is going to get harmed, etc. That it just proves two things. First, AI can identify some stuff, and CGIs can also be biased. What are the specific things that we prove within this round? The first thing that we prove, unless engaging with opening op. So the only impact opening op has is that people are not going to have hope, etc. There are two first response and then flip. First response I have is that people do not have hope, or people have symmetric hope on both sides of the house. Because regardless of what the consequence is, or regardless of how biased the system is, it is very unlikely that you're going to lose hope on both sides of the house. If a harm is, or if a damage has happened to you right now, you have this immediate desire that I want to go ahead and get justice. Regardless of what kind of system exists, you want to file cases. That means this hope exists symmetrically. Why do we have more hope? Because we prove that the data that you collect is from individual cases. I do not know what kind of life the CJI has lived in his entire life, or what kind of opinion formation does this have. The data that is collected is from the individualistic experiences. That means I'm aware that my case that was 10 years ago that my father fought also is included in this thing. I know that my community fought a specific case for land acquisition within this specific time frame is also included within this particular paradigm. That means on hope, they actually flip this. People now think that this system is now becoming more and more unbiased on our side of the house. That is how we flip opening opposition. That is why we also have more hope on our side. The second thing I want to prove is that when you have certain uniqueness, it now incentivizes specific people to file more number of cases, because this is the link on opening government, or missing on opening government. The end impact on opening is that we are going to be very efficient and these people are just going to be good thing. What's the impact? I'm not sure of the impact. We say the moment at which the data now becomes more important and you identify unique patterns, or you identify newer cases within Supreme Court, and note it is also shown on public platform or on media. We think in these instances specific groups who have communal oppression or who have neglection within the status quo are now going to identify these cases on our side of the house as well. That is why they file more cases.
Even if AI lists all the correct cases, O tells you that people's faith in the system is ensured when the panel of judges is made in a fair way, leading to the fairest outcome, and not just when the case is listed.
But people don't know about it. I'm not sure why exactly are people ever going to know about it. On comparative, people know about these proximate experiences. Why does closing government win this round? We explain two specific things. The first thing we explain is that these newer kind of cases are going to come. It has two specific benefits. The first benefit is, Samara points out, a lot of times whistleblowers are not coming out. What's the harm of this? There are two specific harms. The first harm is the current oppressive government or current specific areas that are not getting any representation with the status quo are now going to get more visibility. Look, this is the a priori benefit, because on comparative, it is very unlikely that you're going to scrutinize government for a very long period of time. At best, you can file some PILs, but the CGI is not going to let this case come forward. That means within long term, there exists a narrative that probably filing case against the state does not give you any amount of utility. But secondarily, on our side of the house, on comparative, when these specific newer cases start arising, it is very likely that you can bring structural changes within the long term. What happens on the comparative? When these people who want to save or who want to have a better future for themselves within the current status quo do not get this right, what do? They can do multiple things. Because if you do not file cases or oppression happens, either if you are a weak or relatively weaker individual, you tolerate harm, you tolerate majority oppression. That means this cycle of oppression continues for a really long period of time. But even if you are, but in other case, if you are a strong person and you do not get any solvency on their side of the house for a really long period of time, it is very likely that you're going to turn to more oppressive or more violent mechanism. That means more protests, more violent things. But guess what? Government still controls this, and it is very unlikely that these whistleblowers are ever going to get representation within the status quo. You can have media control and say that these people are causing harm to private property and public property for that matter. That means we stop these people from just becoming a victim of state oppression and give them more opportunity that they can actually change systems on our side of the house. The second thing, or the most likely outcome is that the outcome of opposition is that these people who are not getting representation are very likely to form their own echo chambers or live within isolation. We think the exclusion of these people from the mainstream judicial system is an a priori harm, because these individuals are never going to get the opportunity or a better life within the long term. That means if opening opposition harm is we have more hope, or then we actually have more or better quality of life within closing government.
There's no correct answer to which case is most important. An opening bench is unable to explain this either, right? Is it most important for a poor person whose entire livelihood depends on whether that particular land grabbing case is settled correctly, gets his land? Is it more important that that a gay person who wanted to get Section 377 decriminalized gets that happens so they can exercise their privacy, they can exercise the right to love who they want? Is it more important that two states who are fighting over how water should be shared from a river, and that decides the livelihoods of farmers, and how livelihoods of farmers is more important? I don't think any of us are qualified to say which of these cases are necessarily the most important, which means that on the delta of proving that the judges have some biases or that AI can fix those biases, none of these cases from opening bench work, because they're not able to show you what is necessarily that framework that we need to prioritize, what is that correct decision of how the roster needs to be made. So because of this, I think opening bench is clearly not winning this debate. What becomes most important then is our case on trust in the judiciary, because that trust is the precursor to people going to the judiciary in the first place to get their problems redressed, right? Why is this rostering by AI the tipping point that Sharun explains to you, right? It's because when I hear that the AI is going to decide the rostering, I start wondering, if the CJI cannot even decide which case should be heard, how can they possibly decide what the correct verdict in a case is? If the CJI, who's the senior most judge, is biased and makes the wrong decisions on what cases should be heard, how can a district court judge, who is probably more likely person for me to go and access for justice, how can they possibly make the correct decision, right? But this isn't all. It's not just things that people, average individuals might think. Political parties, radical parties can utilize this. They can utilize this because when like Shaurya says, the people are going to come up and say, test this AI for biases, and it's revealed to the public because he wants transparency, right? It's revealed to the public that, hey, this AI is biased against Muslims, this AI is biased against poor people, whatever. It doesn't matter if that bias is fixed later or whatnot. The question is always going to be in your head. And those radical parties are going to weaponize this, saying the state is failing you, the judiciary is failing you. You need to take radical action. You need to go maybe riot. You need to you need to take any advantage you can for yourself. That is when people this fear mongering is really easy because people don't entirely understand AI. The average person doesn't understand AI. Fear is an easy way to motivate people, right? What then happens, right? I'm going to weigh why our case on the loss of trust in judiciary is more important than even what government's best case is about possibly selecting the wrong cases, right? Firstly, on their side, maybe a few poor people whose cases that come to the Supreme Court get delayed because of like corruption or rich people or whatever, or maybe they get the wrong bench selected, right? What happens on our side is that most poor people decide that I should stop going to court in the first place because I don't think court is fair, and because of those biases that have come out, or because they just start thinking I can't get a fair verdict in the first place. The CJI possibly can't make correct decisions about anything if they can't even decide which roster, how the roster needs to be made. And know that this becomes extremely important. Our scale becomes much more than theirs because their case still applies only to the poor people whose cases are, or to the people whose cases are going to the Supreme Court or High Court, right? Every single poor person whose case goes to a district court or a lok adalat, right, the lowest tiers of the justice system, which they can actually access, which are not so expensive, they won't even go there. Those small cases, those cases about getting scammed by a money lender or of property disputes that actually have a huge impact on their lives, on their income sources, those kind of things will also stop being heard because these people don't believe the justice system can give them anything. So the scale of our case is so much bigger than theirs. But also, secondly, I'll take you later. Right? Maybe on their side, some Chief Justice will prioritize, I don't really believe they will actually do this, but prioritize some political party. Maybe they will assemble a bench that gives a left-wing judgment, right? Next year, there's going to be a new CJI who is going to have different biases, who is going to, prioritize something different, and overall, this is going to even out. But what happens on our side is that you start believing that as a gay person or as a Muslim, the judiciary simply is not going to protect you, right? You start believing that there's no point in even trusting the judiciary because you don't think, there's no point in even trusting the judiciary, right? Why does this become so important? Why do we care so much about these people, right? It's because to these minorities, this is their last resort, right? The state is probably failing them, society is probably failing them, the government is probably failing them, which means the judiciary is their last resort, it's their only way to get justice. When they lose trust in the judiciary, it not only means that they don't take their cases to court and they don't get the justice that they deserve to get, they don't get to live the lives that they deserve to live. It also means that on an everyday level, they are scared to live in the country. They feel the entire country is against them. This is a terrible state of mind to be living with, by thinking that you cannot possibly get justice. If any harm is committed to you, you just have to live with it and suck it up, because nobody will possibly fight for you. You can't get the case you want, right? And it doesn't matter if maybe a few people's cases somehow get heard. It doesn't matter if they're able to show that that there is some good on their side. What matters is the overwhelming number of people will be scared, will lose this trust. I'll take your part.
The overwhelming number of people go to district courts and don't have lawyers because they're busy looking at the list of this. High courts get huge cases which people already have a vested interest in and don't pull out of. This doesn't reduce trust. All their mechanisms about why you don't trust judges apply to judges who make decisions against you as well. So it doesn't work at all.
Sure, maybe one judge makes a decision against you, maybe another judge made a decision that was in favor of your family member or someone else from your community. And and it doesn't matter that these people go to the district courts, right? The statement that is made is that Chief Justice cannot be trusted to make decisions. The justice system itself is biased and corrupt and cannot be trusted. That is the problem that we're trying to solve. And OG is not able to engage with this, right?
Very good evening to all, and I take this opportunity to welcome our two eminent guests today, and third is sitting in my office. So sir is unable to come. So I take this opportunity to welcome Sri Pathak sir, Suresh ji, and representative of the Tankha sir's office. If I am here today, it's largely because of all of you traveled a long distance to reach the Jabalpur and participate in the national parliamentary debate. I am very happy that you took pain to come to the Jabalpur, a city which I say sleeping city, but you are making it a lively city for coming and participating in today's debate. I believe, just to inform you, sir, that a large number of teams participated in the debate, and I'm sure that our honorable judges who were engaged in yesterday and today also, they might have arrived on a right conclusion. And I wish the winning team and all other teams that you all have won the competition, because you have come all the way to participate in the national debate. And we look forward for your participation in days to come, and even in the next year we'll continue to conduct this national debate moot court competition. So once again, a warm welcome to our chief guests, two guests like Suresh ji and Pathak sir, and of course Professor Ranveer Singh is sitting downstairs, and all the team members of the DNLU, particularly taking interest in this particular activity. So thank you very much.
I don't know how every time I have been called on the stage without informing that I have to say something. And so that's what every time I have to be prepared for this kind of a surprise and extempore. And I've been not a debater, so I cannot just think immediately as well what to say. But yes, what I've been seeing from last 2 days, the campus is very lively with respect. There are a lot of discussions going on each room of the campus right now, and all rooms has been filled with positivity. So for the next 7 days, when the students are taking their classes, those echoes will be vibrating in their ears. They may not be listening to the teachers, but those debaters' voice will still be there. And at this stage, I would like to really thank the office of Aryan Tankha, who have actually financially supported the cause, and we have seen that this debate has grown so much. Last year, we tried to hold the first offline debate because before that the debate was going online. So in online debate, we were having participants from Malaysia, Indonesia, globally we were having participation. But last year we tried to do it offline, and we were not that well last year. But this year we have received total 56 registrations of different teams. And that's a huge number few teams were not able to reach, but still 52 make their presence in the university, and that has made a huge success for this particular debate. And large part of the success goes to the office of Arun Tankha, because the gracious prize pool, which is there, and which is, I think, the India's largest prize pool in debating circuit. No other university or no other institute is having the prize pool of that level. And I'm sure that next year the prize pool and the financial support will incrementally increase. And I wish all the participants all the best for the future. Winning or losing, that's only two sides of the coin. Those who have won, they have done good, and those who have not, they are still in the process of doing good. All the best to you all.
नमस्कार दोस्तों, आदरणीय वाइस चांसलर सर, आदरणीय डॉक्टर सुरेश जी, आप दोनों साथी, एक दिन में दूसरी बार बोलने का मौका मिल रहा है एक ही परिसर में। मुझे अपने कॉलेज के दिन याद आ रहे हैं जब मैं इसी तरह से डिबेट कॉम्पिटिशन्स में जाया करता था। डॉक्टर प्रवीण ने आपसे जो आखिर में कहा वही सच है। जिंदगी में हार और जीत तो लगी रहती है। हर स्पर्धा आपको अगली किसी स्पर्धा के लिए, अगली प्रतियोगिता के लिए, बेहतर बनने के लिए, बेहतर बनाने के लिए प्रेरित करती है। आप में से कौन अभी हारने जीतने वाला हम नहीं जानते, थोड़ी देर बाद विजेताओं को देखेंगे। लेकिन मुझे यकीन है कि जिस विषय पर आज आप सब लोगों ने विचार विमर्श किया है, पूरी चर्चा की है, उसके बाद से आप नई विचार भूमि के साथ यहाँ से विदा होंगे। बहुत सारी सोच की नई नई खिड़कियाँ खुलेंगी। आपने जो सोचा होगा उससे अलग सोचने के लिए भी एक नज़रिया आपको मिलेगा। मुझे लगता है कि ऐसी स्पर्धा, जैसा कि डॉक्टर प्रवीण बता रहे हैं कि देश की सबसे बड़ी स्पर्धा है, सबसे ज़्यादा लोग इसमें भागीदारी करते हैं, शिरकत करते हैं। अगले साल और ज़्यादा लोग आए, और आप सब लोग विधि के विद्यार्थी हैं। अभी हम लोग बात कर रहे थे, डॉक्टर रणवीर सिंह ने कहा कि देश की आज़ादी की लड़ाई में वकीलों का बहुत बड़ा योगदान था। आज भी मैं समझता हूँ कि देश की आज़ादी को बचाए रखने का, संविधान को बचाए रखने का, लोकतंत्र को बचाए रखने का जितना जिम्मा आप सब कानून के पहरेदारों का है, उतना और किसी का नहीं हो सकता। इस लोकतांत्रिक व्यवस्था में दो ऐसी सीढ़ियां हैं जहां पर लोग कार्यपालिका और व्यवस्थापिका से निराश होकर पहुंचते हैं। एक आपके पास यानी अदालतों में, और दूसरा हमारे पास खबर पालिका के पास। जब हमसे भी नाउम्मीद होता है व्यक्ति, तब आपके पास पहुंचता है, अदालत में पहुंचता है। जब उसे लगता है कि उसकी बात ना अखबार में छप रही है, ना टेलीविजन पर आ रही है, कोई न्याय नहीं कर रहा उसके साथ, तब वो अदालत की दहलीज तक पहुंचता है। और वहां से आपकी जिम्मेदारी शुरू होती है। अदालत में भीतर बाद में जाता है, पहले एक वकील से, बैरिस्टर से, एडवोकेट से आप लोगों से मिलता है। तो मैं ये जिम्मेदारी आप सब लोगों के चेहरे पर देख रहा हूँ। आप सब आने वाले कल के कानून के रखवाले हैं, पहरेदार हैं, पहरुए। आप इसकी हिफाजत करेंगे, कानून की हिफाजत करेंगे तो देश की हिफाजत करेंगे। आज जो भी लोग जीतने वाले हैं इस स्पर्धा को, उन सबको बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं। जो पराजित होंगे, जीतेंगे नहीं, उसे पराजित नहीं मानना चाहिए। स्पर्धा में दौड़ है, कुछ इंच आप पीछे रह गए होंगे, अगली बार और तेज दौड़ेंगे, आगे निकल जाएंगे। परिंदों को मिलेगी मंजिल एक दिन, ये फैले हुए उनके पर बोलते हैं। परिंदों को मिलेगी मंजिल एक दिन, ये फैले हुए उनके पर बोलते हैं। वही लोग रहते हैं खामोश अक्सर, जमाने में जिनके हुनर बोलते हैं। आप सबके हुनर आने वाले कल में जमाने में सुनाई देंगे। जैसे आज हमारे वीसी साहब का हुनर हम सब देख रहे हैं, सुरेश सर हैं, आप दोनों महानुभाव हैं, प्रवीण हैं, बहुत सारे लोग हैं। आप सब आने वाले कल में इस देश की आवाज़ हैं। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। जय।
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Manoj Kumar Sinha Sahab, Dean Sahab, my friend Dr. Rakesh Pathak, and friends from Mr. Tankha's office, and dear students from all over the country who have come here to participate in this debate. I know it's been a long day. I don't want to come between you and the trophy. You're all waiting for that. But just to extend my good wishes, as rightly pointed out by Mr. Pathak, you see, I believe that both the judiciary and media played a very critical, both the lawyers rather, and the media played a critical role in the independence of this country, in the freedom of this country. In fact, most of the freedom fighters were either lawyers or journalists or both. Gandhiji started off as editor of Vegetarian magazine. Dr. Ambedkar was editor of Muk Nayak. So you name it, they all had their newspapers. So it was a combination of law and media which gave the country its freedom. And I'm sure that it is the combination of law and media which will ensure that this freedom is preserved. So I'm sure that the university, invited both the most eminent lawyers and well-known journalists for this very important event. And as rightly pointed out, it is the participation that is most important. My wife is a lawyer, so of course these days she argues best with me. So, how important it is, laws, to defend the rights of the citizens. It's a very important role. You are the conscience keepers of the nation. And this kind of a grooming is very important, because that is how, despite the fact that in our subcontinent, so many of our neighbors who got independence along with us are no more democratic countries. They have turned into dictatorships, or they have practicing some kind of distorted democracy. But our roots are so deep-rooted that despite, aberrations like the emergency, we remain a very strong and vibrant democracy. And for that, the judiciary of this country, the media of this country has played a very important role. And I'm sure that events like parliamentary debates will certainly prepare you for that very important role in future also. My best wishes to both the winners and all the participants. Thank you so much.